Good evening and welcome to tonight's program at the Commonwealth Club. My name is Holly Kernan. I'm the Vice President for News at KQED Public Broadcasting, and I am delighted to be your moderator for tonight's program. Joining us is Stacey Abrams, former Minority Leader. Woo! Stacey is former Minority Leader of the Georgia House of Representatives, and she's currently a candidate to become the Governor of Georgia. She is the author of the new book, Minority Leader: How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change. Ms. Abrams grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi, and she writes, "I am driven by a bitter hatred of poverty and the lack of mobility that keeps families in endless cycles of wasted ability." Her book is a roadmap for ambitious people who may not have ever seen themselves reflected in the power structure before. We're excited to have her here tonight to discuss Minority Leader, her historic run for governor, and to take your questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me again in welcoming Stacey Abrams to the Commonwealth Club. We got a tough crowd here tonight.
I see that.
All right, why don't you talk to us first about the influence of your parents? You write about their values of education and faith and service, and you talk about how your mom disliked the terms working poor or working class, and she instead used the term genteel poor, saying, "We had little money, but we read books and we watched PBS."
So both of my parents grew up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which is about an hour north of Gulfport. My dad likes to say he grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, and my mom grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. My mom's family was that abject poverty you read about in Mississippi. My dad's family was slightly better off, but not by much. They both they both struggled in school. My mom was one of seven. She's the only one of her seven siblings to finish high school. She's the first one in her family and the only one to go to college. She went to graduate school, became a college librarian, moved back to Mississippi, and sometimes made less money than the janitor who cleaned the college. My dad is dyslexic, and so his family, there was a history. His two older sisters went to college. He had an aunt who'd gone to college, but no men in his family had ever gone. My father was not supposed to be the first because he couldn't read. And imagine growing up a young black man in segregated Mississippi in the 1950s with dyslexia. They just told him he was stupid. And he heard it a lot. He heard it from people who knew him, who knew he had this amazing mind. But because he couldn't read, because he didn't meet the metrics that were normally assigned to academic performance, they discounted his capacity. But his sisters and his parents realized he had this amazing oral memory. He could remember anything he heard. His sisters would point out that he would tell all their business at the wrong time to the wrong people. And so my father learned to memorize his way through school. He and my mom and dad, they met in high school. My dad was being tutored by my mom because she's really smart. He's smart too, but she's smarter. And my dad says that he says he wooed her. She says he stalked her. We don't really talk about it too much. But they went to college together. And when my mom got into grad school, he supported her when she was in grad school, and they moved back to Mississippi. But my father became a shipyard worker because he couldn't get a job in an office. He was still dyslexic, and people didn't understand this. Dyslexia is a learning difference, and that does not mean that you have diminished capacity. I say all of that to say that their influence on me is threefold. One was that perseverance was built into our blood. They raised us to understand that you cannot suggest that there is some impediment to your success that they didn't know about. I mean, it was like growing up in a Dickens novel with my parents sometimes. So every time you would say, "Well, Mom, but this happened," or "Dad, this was a bad thing," they're like, "Once upon a time." I'm like, "Yes, okay, fine." But it was a sense that they didn't allow hardship to diminish their sense of capacity and their possibility. Number two, they gave us rules. They said, "Look, you're going to go to church, you're going to go to school, you're going to take care of each other. You're going to go to church because you should have a moral framework through which you operate. And that framework should never be used to harm others. It should be used to inform you making good decisions." They said, you're going to go to school because even though it didn't guarantee us economic success, it is the best guarantor or predictor of economic success, and we're going to make sure all of you do it. And they sent all 6 of us to college.
Wow.
And the third was take care of each other. And by that, they meant, we have very little, and we would point that out when they would wake us up to go volunteer. We're like, yeah, you do know we're poor too. My father's response was, look, having nothing is not an excuse for doing nothing. And so...
Ole.
So they would take us to volunteer, and I mean, it meant something to spend time in spaces where your relative lack really butted up against someone's actual lack of more. My mom would say, no matter how little we have, there's someone with less. Your job is to serve that person. And that mantra and that organized way of raising their children in the midst of poverty in Mississippi really led me to believe that I was capable of anything I wanted. And they were very clear. They didn't care what we did in terms of what achievement we wanted to have, but we were expected to achieve. And they expected to be there every step of the way to make sure we got it done.
So, Minority Leader, when I was reading this, it seemed to me that this was sort of you writing to that 20-year-old self that you write about in the book who was encouraged to apply for a Rhodes Scholarship, but you almost didn't do it because there was no playbook for anybody who had your experience becoming a Rhodes Scholar. And so it's sort of like this blueprint for ambition for those who have been considered less than and sort of locked out of power and... is my thesis correct?
Your thesis is absolutely correct. The one caveat I would say is it's not age specific. I think I had my realization around the age of 20 because I was in the midst of this very, this complicated moment of figuring out my life without having a lot of understanding of what it could mean. But what I would say is that a lot of us have these moments over and over again, that you can have it at 20, you can have it at 50, you can have it at 12. And so the goal is, although I wouldn't give my book to a 12-year-old yet, but that the notion is that we're always going to find ourselves in spaces where we don't believe we are entitled to opportunity. And what I want this book to really lay out is that entitlement is ours, and it's not diminished by our difference from those who have the power we're used to seeing, that it belongs to anyone who is willing to work to get it. And that should be all of us.
So it was a little startling to read that you're an introvert. You give your Myers-Briggs, INTJ. How it just seems really counterintuitive to be a politician and an introvert. Talk about how you kind of balance that.
I'm still trying to figure that out. The first time I took the Myers-Briggs test, they had a group of us stand up when they were explaining what each letter meant. And so they asked the 4 of us, what would your favorite day be? And the first person's like, I'd have a massive party. I'd go to Rio, it'd be in Carnival, blah, blah. Next guy was like, I would have a party, but be like my friends and some really close family, and we'd go and do this. The third person said, it would be a good day with, a handful of folks. We'd go to a beach, we'd have fun. Like, I would watch Star Trek in my house by myself. And then the moderator revealed E light, I light, hard I. So yes. But what I understand and there's a great book called Quiet that talks about introversion. And the introversion simply means that it doesn't simply mean, but one of the hallmarks of introversion is that you draw energy. If you're extroverted, you draw energy from people. If you're introverted, you use up your energy and you have to replenish it. And it doesn't mean I'm shy, but I am, and I also have this very strong determination streak that tends to push me forward. But when I first told my best friends I was running for office, the laughter lasted for like 5 minutes. And finally, my friend Will was like, you do realize you have to talk to the voters, right? I'm like, I haven't quite worked out all the flaws in the system, but there's some way to get this done. But I think for all of us, we have some part of who we are that intercedes with what we want, and the question is, which one is stronger, your mission or your personal disposition? And my mission is stronger. I despise poverty. I think poverty is stupid. I think it is immoral. I think it is ineffective. I think it's inefficient, and I think it is solvable. And I've been in the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and the two things I learned, one is that people do things when you tell them to if you're in charge, and it's a lot easier to move it that way. And then particularly in politics, and government, which is really the purpose of politics. There are those who think of politics as a tool for policy, and others who think their policy is a tool for their politics. I'm in the former camp. Politics is the most efficient way I have found to move the policies I think need to be implemented. And therefore, I will overcome my personal introversion to get folks to work with me to get those policies done. And then I will go home and watch Star Trek.
To recharge. All right, so speaking about politics, when you became House Minority Leader in Georgia, you had to figure out how to navigate that, being a woman, being a black woman, not having a playbook, and feeling like the way that other minority leaders had held that position wasn't going to work for you. So can you talk about navigating all of that and what approach you took?
So when I stood for leader, you have to go before your entire caucus, and it's usually a few weeks after the election results. And so 2010 was horrible. Democrats in Georgia had lost every statewide office. We'd lost the Senate to a supermajority, which meant that the Republicans held a 2/3 majority in the Senate. They were close to doing the same in the House. I think they were within 8 votes. Members of my party were switching parties. And I was like, hey, let me be in charge. But my argument to my colleagues was, look, I was the first woman to stand. I would be the first woman. I would be the first person of color. I'm like, look, I've been a minority for a very long time. I am really good at it. Yeah. And we have tried this other approach. Let's see what I can, I can't do worse. But part of it was also the notion that I had to inventory for myself what made sense, what didn't make sense. My predecessor was a good man, but he had been in majority for 25 years. And his way of thinking about combating a new reality was just different because he was used to doing it from a position of power. And we had no power. And if we'd forgotten that, a month after I became leader, the Democrat who was elected to be the chair with me switched parties.
Ouch.
Yeah, on my birthday. Man, it was awful. But I think the larger narrative that I extracted from that was I had to figure out how to manage a caucus of 60, at the time 68, then down to 62, 60 up to back to 62. I had to manage a group of people who all thought they could do my job. Yeah. And in fact, there were a group of men who, during one of our first major controversies, recommended that we adopt a policy that I had to take a chaperone with me to go and negotiate with the other side, because they didn't know if a girl could, basically they didn't know if a woman could do it, and especially because I was also younger than most of them. And my response was printable, but not. I did not engage the conversation for very long. But the reality of that was I had to think about who I was to engage them. And there were legitimate critiques of my leadership style. Every minority leader, Democrat or Republican, who preceded me was a guy, which meant that when men yell, it's seen as powerful. When women yell, it's seen as shrill. Everyone was white. So every stereotype of black people that could be attributed was going to be attributed to me. And, if you'd watched the show Martin, I'm like, I didn't need to be the Shanae of the legislature. So, I wasn't going to have the ability to be voluble and, garrulous in how I did things. But the other reality was I am an introvert, and I tend not towards large gestures. I tend to be quieter in my approach. I'm very passionate, but my passion is very tempered. And so the reality was I had to think through, how do I demonstrate my command of an issue, demonstrate my passion for an issue, but also combat the fact that people thought that I was aloof because I didn't go out drinking and I wasn't as convivial as they thought I should be. And I had to spend a lot of time thinking through that. And I sort of decided, okay, here are the things, if they critique me on it, if they dislike, these are the ones I will accept. These are the ones I will not accept and will not change. And then here are the places where we can negotiate. But once I decided that, then it made it easier to live that. Because when the attacks started coming, I was able to weather them. So when people said that I was cold and aloof, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's what you think. I mean, I'm a perfectly nice person, but I'm not going to be the person who glad hands the way you expect me to. But there were some who said that I needed better relationship skills, and that was true because I had made my way through without building a lot of the personal relationships that you often need to have in politics. Because the hard part of making these choices is that you're often deciding for or against someone you consider a friend. But if you don't have an emotional connection, a personal connection, it is a lot easier to hurt someone. It's a lot easier to make hard choices and mean choices. And I was missing out on an opportunity to engage people in my humanity and to engage their humanity to, as I put it, if not stop stupid altogether, at least slow it down. And so I had to learn how to engage that part of me that I normally would have just discounted and said wasn't necessary.
You may have just answered this, but what's the most useful criticism that you've gotten from a political opponent?
That I needed to be nicer. I mean, and when he said it, I completely discounted. I'm like, I'm very nice. Shut up. But I sat with it and I thought, okay, what does he mean? And what I think there, even in the worst critiques of ourselves, there is usually some kernel of truth. And the part that you revile against the most is probably the part that's the most true. And so when he said I wasn't nice, what he was saying was, you don't hang out with us. You don't share parts of yourself. We don't know who you are. And I tend to be fairly, I like efficient is the word, but I mean, I've got a lot of stuff to do and we've got a lot of things to get done. The world is on fire and I don't have time to talk about, whatever this is you want to talk about. Like, just tell me what you need and I'll get it for you. I mean, the way I say in the book is, look, I don't ask you how your day was, but if your issue was you were sitting in traffic, I will help you with a carpool and I will organize a whole system for you. But I won't actually remember to say, and how was the drive? And so I have to practice that. And what he meant was people need to know you care about not just their circumstances, but about who they are. And I have to think about that because I do care. I just don't sometimes remember to ask. And so part of my responsibility is to think not only about how do I help with the mechanics, but how do I help with the moral and the internal.
All right, let's talk about this run for governor.
Running for governor.
I believe you read in the book that on the spreadsheet that you wrote out after a painful college breakup, had run for the mayor of Atlanta, and you rewrote that to be governor of Georgia. So you've talked about this hatred of poverty. What other things are motivating you? Why do you want this job?
The governor of Georgia came about because I did think I wanted to be mayor of Atlanta. In part because mayor of Atlanta in 1992, 93 was the highest position an African American in the South had held. Doug Wilder had become governor of Virginia in 89, but it turns out he only got to serve a term. And so that just seemed otherworldly. What was accessible, what seemed possible, was that I could be the mayor, which was the highest executive office I could imagine a black woman holding in America. But it was also important because I lived in a city that was changing at the time. It was largely African American, but with a growing white population. But the bifurcation that was often most clear, and I know you guys have no experience with this in San Francisco, was an economic issue. There was class issues. There was gentrification, where I literally lived on a college campus that was beautiful and pristine across the street from one of the oldest housing projects in America. And the town gown division was real. Wanting that job for me was about how do I make myself responsible for bridging that divide, because I could very easily have been on the other side of that street. But what I realized working for the mayor, I worked for the mayor of Atlanta when I was in college, and then I worked for Mayor Shirley Franklin when I was after my stint as a tax attorney, was that the mayor's job is extraordinarily important, but it is bounded on every side by the decisions of the state. The presidency we know about, but the president can do 5 or 6 things that change the world, unless you're the current president, in which case you can destroy it very quickly. Sorry, I shouldn't be editorializing. But that a mayor can do only so much, but the governor has the opportunity to determine the bounds of capacity. The governor can say that these things are true and set a moral tone and a policy tone that allows the mayor to do more. And that an effective executive at the state level not only impacts the city of Atlanta, but also impacts a tiny town that has 5,000 people but is struggling to hold on. That's the job I decided I wanted, because that job had the ability to not only tackle the issues of class and race, but also just the fundamentals about who do we want to be as humans? How do we want to engage each other, and what role can government play in bringing together the private sector and the nonprofit sector and the public sector to make that reality?
You talk about when you started talking to friends, actually, and acquaintances about the idea of you running for governor, that people were saying society isn't ready for a Black female governor, and that this was an arrogant idea of you to even contemplate this. And maybe the book was born of that.
I'd started writing it before, but it helped. So my assistant Chelsea is here, and she actually sat with me during a lot of these conversations, and it's harrowing. It is emotionally devastating to talk to people who've known you most of your life, especially most of your adult life, including people who were legitimately part of getting me to the space, who said, "Oh, you're so smart. You are so capable. You'd be a great governor, but you're a Black woman." Like they were giving you a diagnosis. I'm like, I hadn't noticed. Oh my God. That changes everything. And it was said in a way that was what I realized after the 5th or 15th or 50th conversation, that it was an excuse for why they didn't believe I could do it. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that's hard, because you just explained all of the reasons that this should be so. But my race and my gender justify in your mind not helping me do it. Mm. And the fact is, they felt comfortable telling me that, which then meant to me, did I ever know you? But more importantly, did you ever know me? And it was hard. And I am not one given to tears, but my eyes glistened a few times. I may have said some inappropriate things. But that's going to happen for many people when you want more than people expect you to want, or than they think you're entitled to want. That's that moment where you have to decide how much do you want it, because it is a terrible moment when those who should be your cheerleaders are the ones out there laying the landmines to destroy your opportunity. And one of the most devastating moments for me in this campaign was that someone who put me in positions to learn how to do this job not only opposed me, but did so in a way that tried to diminish my reputation and my credibility. And that is hard to come back from. It's hard to understand, what did I do to make her believe that that was appropriate? And did she see something in me that I didn't see that makes her suddenly abandon what she has known of me for 20 years? And it's hard. It's very hard. And I don't have a full-time therapist, so I have to figure it out myself. And what I figured was, look, I scare her, and I scared them. And that fear may not be a fear of me. It may be a fear of what I represent. It may be a fear of what they thought they believed, and now they realize, not so much. And the issue is, do you let that fear, either your own or theirs, distract you and deter you? And I think the answer is absolutely not. Going back to your earlier question, you figure out, is there anything in their fear that is legitimate that I need to work on? Mm-hmm. But sometimes the answer is no. Nope, this is just theirs, and they need to go figure it out for themselves. I'm going to go become governor. I'll come back and talk to you then.
But in this manual here for success and ambition, you say that I learned to plan for victory and for defeat. Can you talk about why it's important to plan for defeat?
Because this stuff is hard. You don't win very often. I mean, I'm a black woman Democrat from Mississippi and Georgia in politics. I mean, it's like, seriously, like no one should play that on a roulette table. This is a bad idea. But that doesn't mean you don't try. And for me, it's the internalization of the realization that incrementalism isn't bad. We are raised to believe in these the 3-act arc of humanity and of our lives. That your first act is, you set your goal. Your second act is complication, but the third act is triumph. Mm-hmm. Never happens. It's not the way it works for most of us. And for some, it does. It works out exactly that way, and we start to believe that we're like them until we realize there's something about us that which of these things is not quite like the other. And that's why you have to plan for defeat. That's why you have to plan to lose, because you're not going to win every time. I would, as leader, we would have these bills that we would get righteously indignant and we'd be angry, and I would have this great plan. And what I wanted my caucus to understand is we are not going to win. There is no universe in which we are going to be successful, because at the end of the day, it's about a vote, and there aren't enough of us. Our job is not to win. Our job is to lose really well. And planning to lose well feels internally bad, because as Americans we're taught winning is the only thing, but losing well means you get to stay alive. You get to stay in the game. And if you mediate harm so that those who have no role and don't know what's happening, their lives aren't made dramatically worse, it's just a little worse, that's actually a good thing. Because I've been in the position of politicians who wanted all or nothing, and nothing sucks. It does. It's harmful, and so what I've tried to and not only embed in my caucus members, but also in the staff that we had, and we had these amazing young people who worked with us, is that victory is sometimes just about not being destroyed. And I know in this day and age, it's an important reminder. I mean, we heard the news today about Justice Kennedy resigning, and there are those who are, getting out their hair shirts and, getting, we're gnashing our teeth. But the reality is this. This man, before he's taken this step, has just voted several times against things that we think are fundamentally important. His successor will likely be worse. But we can mediate against that because our system is designed for us to lose well. Our system is designed that in a midterm election, we cannot change who the president is, but we can change everything else. That's important.
So speaking of change, one of the things that's, I think, so interesting about your candidacy for governor is that rather than go the traditional route, which I think was what a lot of people talk to you, appeal to the swing voters, moderate your message, et cetera, you're trying to expand the political voice to pull people into politics who haven't traditionally voted, who haven't traditionally felt that politicians in power represented them. So what kinds of conversations are you having with voters?
They're really fun, and sometimes they're surprised. Like, I'd knock on a door, and they're like, "Wait, you really are a politician?" Yes. Wait, but you're really a Yes, I promise, I am. And the reality is, for a lot of these communities, my community, no one knocks on your door. No one calls you. No one asks what you think. My parents are what are known as super voters. These are people who have not missed an election since I think they turned 21, so since the 1970s, I do not believe my parents have missed a single election. I do not recall a single politician knocking on their door to ask them their opinion and to ask for their vote. Because the neighborhood we lived in is a neighborhood that was discounted as a viable source of voting. And that happens across this country. Democrats, and I am a Democrat, Democrats lose because we keep trying to convince those of greater means or those who seem to be the most engaged to change their ideological beliefs. It won't happen. Because I dare anyone in here to tell me an ideology you would change if Republican just yelled it really loud. And I think it's actually insulting to Republicans. It's insulting to those who share a conservative ideology to think that their ideology is less strong than my own. That's an insult, because there's nothing you can say to me that will diminish my belief in civil rights, in reproductive rights, in the power of labor unions. There's nothing you can tell me that will say that is not so. Why would I diminish the legitimacy of someone else's belief system by saying the same to them? The answer instead is to talk to people who actually share my ideology but do not share my behavior. Changing behavior is a lot easier than changing ideology. You could try to get someone to believe what you want, or you can just tell them to do what you said do. That's what parents do every day. Like, the whole notion of parenting is, fine, you don't have to agree with me, but you're going to do it because I said so. It also works for your boss, you know. And so my mission is not to impose as a parent or a boss on voters, but to treat them as thoughtful people who simply need to understand why voting matters. And that means giving them a legitimate choice. The extent to which a politician moderates her message or pretends an ideology she does not hold, people know hypocrisy when they see it. And you don't take time off from work to go vote for a hypocrite if you know it. And so what happens is that those who believe that ideology vote for the person who shares the ideology, and the person who doesn't knows that you're not the one, so they don't show up. And so my mission is to go to those very folks. And so the conversations we have, I talk about criminal justice reform because I have a brother who's been to prison twice and who is struggling and doing well this time, trying to build his life back. But he needs leadership at the state level who can make certain he has access to health insurance. I talk about this woman, Pam, who wants someone to believe that she should be able to start a small business even though she's been the cashier at Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. I talk about the need for public transit because it doesn't matter if you bring 1,000 jobs to a community if no one who needs the jobs can get there. And so the responsibility is to not just have ideology, but to connect that ideology to action and then to tell folks what that action looks like and means for them.
So you said something that both baffled and intrigued me. You said, my campaign for governor has illuminated issues I hadn't fully considered and still cannot completely articulate.
So part of running for office is that you talk to a whole lot of people. And there are parts of these conversations that help you understand that you live a very narrow life. I grew up in Mississippi. I came of age in Georgia. But I grew up in a two-parent family with parents who adored their children. And so sometimes having conversations with single parents who are struggling to understand how they can take care of their kids, or who have abandoned a belief that this is possible, like, that baffles me. I don't know how I can fully articulate that for them. But what I can do is create a structure through an educational system so that any possibility they imagine might come to fruition. There are experiences that happen for folks I will never understand. I consider myself a strong LGBTQ ally, but I don't know what it means to be transgender and 15 and trying to navigate understanding who you are and which bathroom you get to go into. But I don't have to understand it specifically to know it's right to make it possible for you to live who you are. That's the reality.
All right, this is an audience question. You are clearly effective at engaging people across difference. What are your recommendations for tapping into others' empathy, for example, for all of the migrant families the government is separating?
So you want me to fix America? Okay.
That's all we're asking.
That's it. A part of empathy is not yelling And I don't mean yelling as in loud volume, but yelling as an effective tool for communication. Meaning that if you just keep saying the same thing over and over again with emphasis, that does not mean anybody hears you. We are very good at tuning out what we don't want to hear. Empathy requires connecting it to another person's humanity. The reason the non-necessary executive order came into being was because empathy was finally achieved through the sound of crying children. Because everyone has heard a child cry. There is no sound more heartbreaking than the sound of a child crying. And trying to explain the importance of migrants and the importance of allowing humanity to lead us forward can sometimes feel like yelling. You're not going to convince someone who thinks that people coming into this country who don't have documentation should not be here. You're not going to change their mind, but you can change their behavior about what happens when they're here. That's what empathy does. Empathy does not change what you believe. Empathy changes how you engage what you believe. And the extent to which we focus so much on making people agree with us, we are going to lose. I don't need you to agree. I just need you to do what I need you to do. And empathy is about finding the human connection that makes you think that's good. A less emotional example is the Tea Party in Georgia. There is environmental legislation that the Chamber of Commerce and the governor and Republicans were trying to move for about 2.5 years. And we blocked it. Democrats blocked it. Not because we suddenly had more numbers, but because I went to talk to members of the Tea Party. I did not try to convince them that climate change was real. They do not believe it. I convinced them property values are real and that the erosion of the stream buffer would erode the property value of those who own that land. And therefore, they should work with us to stop bills that would allow someone to lose the value of their land. Because for the Tea Party, taxes matter. That's their thing. Therefore, I understood what they believed, and I empathized with what they thought was the most important part of the conversation, and from there talked about the behavior that would be necessary to achieve our common ends. Never had to have a conversation about climate change. That would have been useless. But talking about property values got me the same vote I would have gotten had I spent 20 hours yelling about why climate change was real and pulled out charts and, propped open their eyes like one of those torture films and made them watch the Al Gore documentary every single day. Like, that wouldn't have changed anything. But this reality of who they are, empathy, because empathy isn't just about people feeling what you feel. It's about them feeling that their feelings matter. That's what empathy is. And too often we hold empathy to be, you have to feel me and feel me for why I want you to feel me. That's not empathy. That's selfishness. Empathy is, I want us to have a common bond, and it can come from a different space, but it's just as legitimate if your reason for feeling comes from a place that's not my own.
So speaking of empathy, you write, we cannot do this alone. Allyship speaks to a willingness to fight for equality on behalf of marginalized groups of which you are not a part. What is your advice to aspiring allies?
So the two examples I use, I talk about the LGBTQ community because under my tenure as Democratic leader, we added 4, so Renita, Simone, Sam, and Park, 4 new members to the House of Representatives, thereby quadrupling the number of openly gay members of the House. And there were those who then presumed that my empathy was born of like-mindedness. And I said, no. But I know that my rights are not secure if their rights aren't secure. And that's why I'm an ally. I received the Compañeros Award, the highest award from the Latin American Association. I am not Latin American at all. But I was the strongest advocate outside of Pedro Marin, who for years was the only only Latino Democrat in the House, but he needed help. And my job was to stand with him on issues. And there were those who pushed back and said, no, Black people are losing their jobs because of immigrant labor. I'm like, that's not true. But the reality is that there's a wedge that is used to try to separate our communities. His community's protection for their jobs is intimately yoked to the protection of African Americans who are being forced into misclassification jobs. We have to stand together because otherwise neither of us succeed. Allyship is about standing up for others, not because you benefit directly from their advancement, but because you know their advancement means your advancement is coming too. And sometimes it's not coming soon, but it'll get there.
All right, so a couple of audience questions. Has President Obama reached out to you?
So I've met with Valerie Jarrett, who's been incredibly kind, and I anticipate being able to reconnect with the president soon. But here's the thing. I was honored during my tenure as minority leader to work with the Obama administration, to work with President Obama himself on key issues of healthcare and criminal justice reform. And I imagine that one day we will lock arms and go forward. But I'm working on it.
Okay, another audience question. I'm a Black Georgia girl who moved to California 20 years ago. When you are elected governor, what key changes are you going to prioritize? And in parentheses, yay for positive change.
Do you want to raise your hand? Oh,
After. Right there.
I
there.
can't see you anyway. Okay. There you
Yay!
go. The first responsibility that I will have as governor on January 9th, 2019 will be the expansion of Medicaid in the state of Georgia. Medicaid expansion means access to health care for more than 500,000 Georgians. It means saving more than 15 rural hospitals. It means creating for the first time in Georgia's history a statewide network of mental health and substance abuse treatment opportunities. It means lowering our maternal mortality rate. It means making certain that we have a property tax base in our counties, because no one's bringing jobs to a place where you could die of a stroke. And so being able to create thousands of jobs throughout the state of Georgia, stabilize economies, and build capacity. Medicaid expansion there are no magic wands in politics, but it's really close. Georgia forfeits $8 million a day when we refuse Medicaid expansion, and I want our money back.
All right, here's a real hardball. How can we in San Francisco support you? What is your campaign website so we can give money?
I'm glad you asked. So the website is StaceyAbrams.com, StaceyAbrams, but if you put in any variation on the theme, you will find us. We need three things, and this is going to shock you. Please brace yourselves. We need money. But here's the thing about money. Money is not, when I talk about money, we have run and will continue to run an unprecedented field program in Georgia. We talk to voters. We spent 80% of our money during the campaign, during the primary, focused on reaching voters directly, not on television. You would have thought I set a bonfire in the front of our campaign headquarters and just lit everyone's money on fire the way pundits reacted to this idea. But what we found is that if you talk to voters, they will listen, and if you talk to them often enough, they will vote, which is why we turned out 555,000 voters in our primary. The prior primary, it was 308,000 roughly. So financial investment goes towards us scaling that program. Georgia has 6 million voters. We have about 1.2 million Democrats who vote in primaries. We've got 1.5 million eligible leaning Democrats who do not vote. We lose elections by 250,000 votes. So if we can reach them, we can win. It's math. So that's one. Number one is money. Number two is mobilization. We need folks to help us reach those people, and it's through phone banking, it's through texting, and you can do it from anywhere, and you guys have amazing technology out here in California. We had a lot of folks from California who were incredibly instrumental in helping us reach out to more than 1.8 million voters during the primary. We need to scale that in the general, and so your mobilization helps. If you go to our website and sign up, we will send you lots of information about how you can volunteer from wherever you are. And number three is message. Social media matters. It helps people believe that this is possible. The more they hear about this campaign, the more they hear from people like themselves about why they should care about this campaign, the better we do. Because there's a moment of disbelief that comes about because, I don't look quite like the others. And the more we have an external narrative, people across this country talking about why this election matters, why Georgia matters. Because here's the thing. We have the busiest airport in the world, third largest port on the East Coast. We, after LA, are one of the top locations for filming. We are a state of more than 10.5 million people, the 9th largest economy, and the governor of Georgia is responsible for signing the gerrymandering maps, the redistricting maps in 2020. So, if you don't want the maps to be gerrymandered, then make certain that she is elected to either sign or veto those maps. And just to put this in context, Georgia has 14 legislative districts. We are likely to pick up another one. We have 16 electoral votes. Georgia winning, me winning Georgia, changes America. That's why you should care.
Another audience question. Current Democratic Party leaders and their poor messaging is why largely, it says 2018, I think they mean 2016 was lost, and why Dems may lose 2020. Also, why wins like Ocasio-Cortez are needed. So what specific and concise message do you endorse for the party? Save the Democratic Party.
I actually disagree with the notion that you have to have a universal message from the Democratic Party. And here's why. I've been a Democrat my entire life. I work with Republicans. Republicans have very simplistic, reductive messages. In the South, we basically call it God, guns, and gays, okay? But think about that. The ability to be so reductive means that you eliminate so many parts of a conversation. The Democratic Party is about the rest of the story. It's about the rest of the conversation, and that conversation differs depending on where you are. The Democratic Party fundamentally believes that we have a role to play in everyone's success, that no one does it alone. That's the message of the Democratic Party. But the way that message is lived differs based on where you are. Because the message in Georgia is not the same as the message in New Hampshire, and that's different than the message in Idaho. Paulette Jordan has a different story she's got to tell. My approach in Georgia, I talk about education, economic development, basically educating children from cradle to career, building a diverse and inclusive economy, and having an effective, engaged government. That makes sense in Georgia. That may not make sense everywhere. But the extent to which we decide that we aren't going to vote for Democrats because they don't have a pithy slogan is problematic. Because my problem is the pithy slogan may exclude my community. It may exclude my reality, and I'd rather have a conflated message that is overly large and unfortunately cumbersome that has resources that are actually talking to people about their issues. Because the more reductive you are, the less you cover the rest of America. That said, we didn't lose in 16 because we didn't have a clear message. We lost in 16 because we didn't make anyone do anything about whatever message there was. 70,000 people changed the direction of America. That is a solvable problem. We have to, whatever the message is, we have to make sure we have candidates delivering the message to every single person. And I think what Ocasio showed, I think my friend Ben Jealous just won, Paulette Jordan, Michelle Lujan Grisham, people across this country, David Garcia, if you're paying attention to Arizona, you guys had a recent election here too. I mean, we have folks who can deliver these messages. It's not the message, it's the messenger, and it's believing that people deserve to hear it. That's the biggest problem we have. We have to stop talking about field and actually do it. That's how we win elections.
Another audience question. How can a traditional Democratic candidate appeal to the pro-life voter?
Again, pro-life is an ideology. If you truly believe that abortion is wrong, there is very little that I should do to change your belief. Because no one is going to convince me that the right to choice is wrong. Why do I believe that someone else's heartfelt standing is somehow changeable? That's not how our minds work. That's not how our hearts work. The issue is, do we create space so that believing in choice creates an opportunity to have other conversations? My job is not to convince someone who is anti-abortion that abortion is right. My job is to say that anti-abortion is one part of a larger narrative, because being pro-life is not the same as being anti-abortion. I believe that there are those who are anti-abortion, but if you do not, I want to talk about what happens when the child gets here. You and I may not agree about choice, but let me tell you what I would do differently for the children of America. And here are the ways I would deal with this. I live in a state that is a very strong anti-abortion population. I myself was anti-abortion for most of my formative years. But the more my transition, my conversion did not happen because people yelled at me and told me I was wrong. It happened because I had friends who confronted those experiences, and I realized I didn't know enough. And my curiosity, but also my empathy, said I needed to understand more. And the more I understood, especially the power of the legislature, I realized I could not in good conscience limit someone's choice. That's a lot to do. And you can't do that in a slogan, and you can't do that on a commercial, and you can't do it on someone's doorstep. And you can't do it by pretending that that's kind of sort of what you think. And so instead of trying to change that person's position on being anti-abortion or not, my mission is to talk about the other parts of my message and my intentionality, and say that if these other things matter to you as well, on balance, you don't have to diminish the authenticity of your belief, but do you think that you can encompass these other pieces to make it so? Because my goal is not to take away your ability to deny access to abortion to yourself. It's simply to say that you don't get to impose that belief system on anybody else.
Another audience question. In your opinion,
It's a real easy question.
in your opinion, is our system set up to not find a solution for poverty?
I think that there are structural barriers that we have. I'm having two thoughts at the exact same time. One is yes, but I think that's too easy. I think that there are structural barriers. Ta-Nehisi Coates has done extraordinary work talking about those barriers for African Americans. There are barriers that impede the Latino community. If you look at wealth creation in America, whites about more than 125,000, Latinos about 13,000, African Americans about $11,000 in wealth. Because the markers of how we build wealth have been very strictly prohibited for minority communities for a very long time. And wealth is often inherited. And so when you create a system that survives for more than 200 years, and in the last 50 you're like, maybe not, that doesn't erase the previous years. And we haven't erased the structural barriers. And so I think there's a structural inequity in our system that makes poverty not only possible, but the better choice for some. It is easier to get things done when people feel that they don't have a space and they have no hope and no opportunity. They stop demanding as much of you. There's also a complacency piece. We get used to seeing people on the streets. We get used to walking by them. We get used to not going to that part of town. As state legislator, I represented one of the wealthiest districts in one of the wealthiest areas in the counties I represented, and some of the poorest. I moved my community meeting around every time. So if you wanted to know what was happening, you had to come somewhere you didn't normally go, because they needed to confront. If your children went to the nicest school in our district, I wanted you to come and see what the other schools look like. Because if you don't see it, the complacency sets in and you don't think it's necessary. And then when I vote for or against something that you think is necessary, you're very comfortable getting angry with me because you didn't know the other thing existed. And so part of it is structural, but part of it is also our fault. we get used to it and we stop thinking that we can solve it. And that means those who want the structural barriers, who want it to continue, they win. Because we, through tacit agreement, say, oh, yeah, okay, it's just going to be. It doesn't have to. Because part of combating poverty is that we have to give something up ourselves. That's the hardest part of ending poverty. Poverty is okay. And notice there's a small group of people who clapped. because here's the thing. I mean, NIMBYism does the notion not in my backyard. It's true about our pocketbooks too. We are perfectly happy to solve problems as long as it doesn't cost us anything. Poverty is going to cost us a lot because there are perquisites that we've gotten used to that will have to go away if we are to engage more people in prosperity. That's just the way it works. That's math, it's economics, it is truth. And that's just hard. And so I do believe there is sort of an Illuminati-like group of people. I'm not being facetious, but there are those who really do maintain poverty and to benefit themselves. But we are complicit because when the small things happen and we have to make choices, we choose ourselves and not eliminating poverty. And that's where we can't just put it off on someone else. It's about us too.
I think it's almost 50% of people are either low income or on the poverty line at this point in this country. I mean, for the last 40 years, we've basically redistributed wealth upward. So this question says, poverty, you said it's solvable. Homelessness is a big problem in San Francisco. Can you please solve homelessness for San Francisco? Because we literally have tent camps on our sidewalks here. It's a humanitarian crisis. That's just what you see. There are many, many people who are on the edge of homelessness, couch surfing, living in cars, living in tents. Well, obviously tents, those are the ones that you see, but that are just living on the edge of, living in alleys. But also, when we did a whole series on this, people called and said, you don't see me, you don't know that I'm homeless because I have a full-time job, I'm living in my car, nobody knows this, so there's this whole catastrophe that we're not even seeing. So can you solve that for us, please?
Well, I can tell you what the answer should be. So here's the thing. Georgia, I served on the board of the Gateway Center for the Homeless for a decade. I helped the city of Atlanta convert an old jail into a homeless shelter. There are basically three populations that are the most intractable when it comes to poverty. Women and children typically fall into homelessness because of wage inequality and because of wage insecurity, economic insecurity. You lose one shift, you miss one payment, and your eviction rate goes up, and you lose your house, or you get divorced, or you're a victim of domestic violence. And men can be victims as well, but it's typically women. Most of the women you find who are homeless because their economic security is just so tenuous. The way to solve that is to increase wages and to reduce the cost of housing. But when you talk about reducing the cost of housing, people then decide, well, where is that low-income housing going to be? I don't want it near me. Or I don't want to pay more so someone can pay less. We are all good with wealth redistribution until it's our wealth that's being redistributed. The second group are those who have dual diagnosis, often mental health issues coupled with substance abuse issues. You have to solve both of those challenges, and it is a sustainable system that has to be put in place. Because if you have a mental health challenge and you have a substance abuse issue, one is usually feeding the other. And so we know that to move people in that situation, in dual diagnosis, into sustainable housing, it takes years. Because it's not just giving them housing, it's then giving them the supports they need, it's checking in on them, it's recognizing that crises do not happen on a convenient schedule, and that the crisis, when it happens, has to be immediately resolved if you do not want the cycle to start again. The third group is typically the group that is suffering from trauma. And that cuts across the two, economic insecurity group and the dual diagnosis group. Those traumas can be one time or they can be sustained. But we then have to address the issue of trauma. We have to address the issue that it's not always a mental illness, but it may be a mental issue. So someone who is the victim of domestic violence loses the ability to see herself or is in a deep depression and cannot find a way to sustain their jobs. We have to be willing to accept that all of those can exist and that they're all out there. I vote against, in Georgia, I have voted against homestead exemptions, which does not endear me to anyone. Because I know that a homestead exemption reduces, in many ways, access to funding for other things. There are basic homestead exemptions you can have, but when I've seen them exceed that amount, I vote no, which does not endear me to my community. I vote no privately on the ballot and in the voting booth. And that means I am telling people, take my money. I'm giving money that could reduce my property taxes. It is a hard thing for us to do because we, in the moment of a property tax decision, we're like, but my property taxes are so high. I think about the person who doesn't have property. And I think of the responsibility I have to pay a little bit more, or sometimes a lot more, because it is more psychically harmful for me to know that I haven't done something about making sure there's access to housing for those who need it. So we know the solution. The solution is money. Money solves a lot of problems. But it solves the problem by putting in place the services we need. And what we really mean sometimes is that we don't want the problem to take that long to solve. And poverty is complicated. And it takes a lot of money and a lot of time. And there is no silver bullet. There is no magic wand. But that doesn't mean it can't be solved. It just means we have to be patient and relentless. And it's going to cost every one of us something to get it done.
So we only have a couple more minutes, and I want to try and get to a couple more audience
I'll give much
questions.
shorter questions.
All right. Audience question. Given the events of the week, how do we navigate an even more right-wing SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, for the next foreseeable future?
I can't give short answers. You give Okay, very quickly. We just have to remember that this too will pass. 2018 is a big year for change. Changing the Senate, changing the House, impeding the ability of this to continue to happen. But they are going to get a Supreme Court justice. And that Supreme Court justice is going to be antithetical to everything everyone in this room believes, unless you accidentally wandered in here thinking you were going to something else. Our job is, and everyone say it with me, is to lose well. They are going to get someone, but we can make it really hard. We can protest, we can vote, we can engage, and we cannot get distracted by the rant of the week or the tweet of the day. That is what we do to navigate this.
One of the inspiring things you say in your book is that as a minority, we don't have the luxury of giving up, I think.
We don't.
So of all your career paths, being an attorney, an author, tax law, an activist, a scholar, a politician, what are the aspects of work and ambition that have given you the most satisfaction?
I fundamentally like humanity. I think we're kind of cool. And everything I do is in some way intersects with that. I love telling good stories. I write romantic suspense novels. Yes, Selena Montgomery. And I write those novels because I like to explore different identities I could have had I not chosen this. I've got one about an ethnobotanist, another who's a grifter, just all kinds of stuff, fun things. I love the law because it's organized and structured, but also as a tax attorney, it's a puzzle to be solved. How do you make these pieces fit? I love politics because I believe that good policy makes life better. And I fundamentally want people to have better lives, whether it's through reading a quick book or spending some time mapping out your new life with Minority Leader, or living in a state that believes that you deserve better. That's what I want to do, and that's who I am.
So we only have time for one final question, so you'll have to be really quick on this one. Is there any politician, living or dead, who inspired you to run for office? Thank you.
I wouldn't say they inspired. So here's the thing. The politicians who continue to inspire, they didn't inspire me to run for office, but I take inspiration from their examples. Barbara Jordan, Lyndon Baines Johnson, very complicated man, but someone who made racism and advocacy work in weird ways. And Shirley Chisholm.
All right, our thanks to Stacey Abrams, candidate. Woo! Yay! The audience is giving Stacey a standing ovation.
Thank you very much.
Our thanks to Stacey Abrams, candidate for governor of Georgia and author of the new book, Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change. Stacey will be signing books outside the room in just a minute, so make sure you pick up a copy as you leave. I'm Holly Kernan, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club, the place where you are in the know, is adjourned.
Holly, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a total pleasure.